In the studio with me, I've got Amu Kulandebele from Zimbabwe's Alliance for the People's Agenda, and I'm also joined by Dr. Gideon Chitanga, who's going to give us as well some of his views and analysis. Gentlemen, good morning and welcome. Thank you very much for coming through this morning. I mean, everybody I've spoken to since this morning acknowledges a couple of things, just as we kick off. One is that his family just lost a loved one, and we need to pay our respect and say we acknowledge the death and his condolences, number one. Number two is that we're talking about a man who was a revered liberator, you know, up to 1980. And slowly from 1980, after Zimbabwe's independence, somehow the wheels came off. I put this question to the spokesperson of ZANU-PF earlier on the program. He said, well, for their perspective, the only problem they had with their former president is that he stayed in power for too long. Let me start with you first, Amo. What do you say to that?
I think there is no one who can deny that he stayed too long, because if he had stayed, let's say, as much as maybe Nelson Mandela, he would have left at a time people loved him, and he wouldn't have left in the fashion and manner that he did. So obviously he left too long. But minus leaving too long, there is the fact that he did make some mismanagement of the economy before he even had left. So those are facts. We can't just say it comes down to it was just too long. There are other things he did wrong. Yeah.
There was a mismanagement of the economy. I spoke to Kevin Malunga a short while ago. Kevin Malunga, Dr. Chitanga, is an advocate. Kevin Malunga is a deputy public protector. His father, Sidney Malunga, was part of ZAPU, which was also fought for the liberation of Zimbabwe. He said, when I asked him that question, he said, well, Mugabe for him represented two things. He was a good liberator, a revered liberator, a hero, but he was a bad president. What do you say to that, Chitanga?
So the part of a bad president, I think, speaks to one's idea and expectation of what a president, an African president and a Zimbabwean president would be. It's very difficult, like you introduced earlier, to judge Mugabe in one way or another. I think, for me, his legacy should be contextualized within a lot of things.
And what kind of context would that be?
Yes, and we need to think of him in the context of liberation politics. We need to think of him in the context of post-liberation politics. We need to think of him in the context of what in academic debates within Africa is referred to as the transitions to democracies. You need to evaluate his economic management. Others want to focus on his human rights record. All these are complexities, and these complexities are grounded in changing politics, changing geopolitical contentious issues. So if you broaden that, you can pick a few things. One, I think his legacy will be debated around the land reform issues. And for me, when you look at minus the human rights and any other issues, his advocacy of that issue is excellent. It is a serious colonial legacy issue that everyone, including economic players who are interested in progress in Africa, should think very hard about and find a solution to. The second issue is the issue of democracy and human rights. I think that there has always been a stubborn trait in Mugabe as a person to hold onto power. And democracy outside majoritarian dominance was meaningless to him. And his exercise of power is something that he lived for and chose to nearly die for until he was moved out by his comrades.
Now, from the Zimbabwe's Alliance for the People's Agenda perspective, you've heard what Dr. Chitanga is saying here. What will be these issues that you're looking back on? You said it can't just be the fact that he stayed in power for too long.
Yeah.
What would it be for you?
Firstly, one of the main things that Robert Mugabe spoke about when he came into power was creating an egalitarian state, right? And then as soon as about 1982, you start having the Kukurahundi issues, right? And you go up to the year 2000. We can want to speak in any direction about the whole land thing, but there's always the suspicion that maybe that was done as it were, maybe as a political expediency. So the fact that after the land reform, for a second, it's almost as if there are no white Zimbabweans. It's almost as if anyone who's white is an enemy, right? Which almost is contradictory to the fact that we accepted that we are reconciling and egalitarian. So on cohesion, there is clearly a fail there. And there is also within the Shona groupings, there is issues of Garanga, Zezuru, and all of that. So in terms of keeping the people united, just that alone, you can also see that there was a disaster.
And who shall forget the 5th Brigade in the mid-80s, the North Korean trained Free Brigade, the terror that they unleashed in Matabeleland?
Yeah, no one can forget that. No one can forget also, this is very important. People should remember that it wasn't just 5th Brigade in Matabeleland. There was 2008 election violence. That's real. There was Mrambachina. That's real. There was all sorts of people being abducted and so on and so forth. So these are real issues. So yeah, we can't just say it was just staying in power too long. And by the way, for my ZANU-PF colleagues, I would say this: when he was staying in power, were they not helping him to stay in power for the most part?
I mean, okay, as we're talking, I'm just thinking. Okay, you mentioned land reform. And I said earlier on this channel this morning that the intention of land reform was the right intention in terms of addressing that colonial legacy. But how it then became implemented might have some points, as you said, showcase some political expediency sometimes. However, it was there for a good. Is there anything else you'd look at Mugabe's tenure, as term of office, and say, that was good? Because somebody said at the beginning education was great,
yes,
but then over the years it became a challenge. And we know poverty levels have increased, unemployment levels are high. Zimbabweans are spread all over the world because they are looking for better opportunities, in terms of, is there anything else, Dr. Chitanga, that we can look at and say, outside of liberation, outside of land reform?
So you have your land reform, you have education, you have health, and this is the first decade of independence. I think that he played a key role in representing the voice of Africans. And this is an important issue when you are a president, because there are things that you can't say and there are things that you can say. And the things that Mugabe said resonated with a lot of Africans. I believe other politicians and presidents were really identifying with his views privately, but they couldn't say these views in public. But at a policy level, right, and if you contest capitalism, there are serious sanctions, because capitalism is a system. It has its political rules and it has its economic rules.
And we know Zimbabwe came under a lot of pressure with the sanctions.
And any country that will dare contest the neoliberal hegemony, right? Any leader would do that. Must be very clear to face the sanctions, and it is up to him to decide what method he uses to interact with such.
Okay, now Kevin Malunga, I'm referring to him again because I just spoke to him short while ago. As we were talking about anybody who challenges the capitalist system, you face a lot of resistance. He said 80% of Zimbabwe's problems were self-inflicted, 20% were external. And that would be those kind of sanctions. Would you agree with that kind of an assessment as a Zimbabwean?
I don't know whether I agree with the figures, but yes, a lot of our problems are self-inflicted because, for example, what excuse can any nation give for corruption? External pressure? No. What excuse can any nation give for lack of cohesion, not being united? External pressure? No. I think, though, however, no one can deny the fact that in an integrated global system, we all need each other. And unfortunately, Africa gets into the global stage when they are already, say, big brothers and the leaders of the free world, as it were. So with all of that in context, if they decide that they don't like what you're doing or saying, that is definitely going to affect you. So sanctions are real. They're a real factor, and any normal person should be able to say, look, we don't need this for development.
Okay, I just want to point out that we are currently also watching President Cyril Ramaphosa in East London.
Yeah.
He's visiting the home of the murdered 19-year-old Uyinene Mkhwejana, and as soon as we get word that we can cross there after he's done, we'll be able to go there. But I'm hoping it will be after we finish our conversation. Now, I commented, okay, I commented earlier that I'm wondering how Zimbabweans are feeling this morning and what they're thinking. We saw the jubilant scenes in 2017 November when Mugabe was removed and President Emerson Mnangagwa came in. And the post-Mugabe era is still very much with us. It's still like, the way you put it, it's like President Robert Mugabe's aura is around still, because even human rights activists in Zimbabwe are accusing Mnangagwa of not doing much different. You mentioned the record of human rights and violations under Robert Mugabe. How do you see the future, Amu? How do you see the future of the country?
I think, like most nations, Zimbabwe is evolving. So when evolution is happening of a society, look, things like ideal democracy and how things should be, it's what we all want. It's what we all aspire to. But there's a difference between utopia and the road to utopia. And that's what I think. I think Zimbabwe is on the road to the ideals. And look, it's going to take time and it'll be gradual, and it may not happen as quickly or in ways that people want every time, but there's a change. I'm not saying President Mnangagwa is the best. I'm not saying he's the worst. I'm saying that that little change that did happen was important. It is as important as the change that we had the opposition figure of Morgan Tsvangirai. See, all these little things are significant in the broader picture of the gradual evolution of a nation. So for me, the future is bright, because there are young people like myself out there who've got new ideas on what life should be like.
I was young like yourself in 1980 as a journalist in Radio Mozambique service, covering this beautiful liberation story of Zimbabwe. I remember the late President Samora Machel saying Zimbabwe is going to become the breadbasket of the region and will be the economic driver, the engine that will drive the growth of SADC. Remember, SADC was founded in 1980 as Zimbabwe became independent. But today we're looking there, we still don't have proper regional integration, among other things. But optimism and hope that Zimbabwe will find its way and really take its rightful place in the region as an effective contributor to our economic prosperity.
That's a difficult and a very pertinent question. So I think that ZANU-PF will for a long time be going through its internal transition. So I see Mnangagwa as a transitionary president within ZANU-PF. But when I look at the people in ZANU-PF, my problem is it's not clear who will take ZANU-PF forward. The second point is ZANU-PF is embedded within the Zimbabwe state, including the military structures. So you have a mutation of what in academic circles is called a party state. And when you have such a structure that overlaps pervasively and it goes into business and every aspect of ordinary life, and there is no clarity on the medium to long term, you have a serious problem, because anything that you raise as a principle that can fit into a jigsaw of reviving in a robust way an economy is in doubt.
Okay.
Who will take this country forward beyond Mnangagwa? If you look at his age, if you look at the ministers, if you look at the key functionaries within ZANU-PF and the state.
Okay, I just wanted to highlight one thing there on the right-hand corner of the screen that you can see at the bottom there now. We are showing visuals live of the Mass in Maputo, the capital of Mozambique. Pope Francis has been visiting there for the last 2 days as part of a three-nation tour. I think background-wise, President Robert Mugabe has got some Catholic background, so we're just streaming that for our viewers. And I heard earlier Pope Francis was leading the Mass in Portuguese. And ZANU-PF, during the days of liberation struggle, he has had head offices in Mozambique. I remember at the time meeting people like Sidney Sekeramai, people like the late Josiah Tongogara, all those days, they used to be there. And then General Mujuru, but at the time he used to be called Rex Nyongo, that was in Nomdigere, and that was Maputo. So we are just making sure that we don't lose focus of this, because we have lots of South African Catholics who've also traveled, and some of their families are here who've gone to Maputo for the Mass. Okay, so the big question you were saying as we continue, Dr. Chitanga, is that the question is who next to take it forward, to bring it hope and optimism. But at the moment, Zimbabwe has lost a former heroic liberator, but as somebody who really messed up. So let's use a normal language in terms of the economy. Yes. You mentioned over the years, although he believed he was doing the right thing at some point, but at some point I think it was too much. Do you think, you've mentioned the word corruption earlier, do you think at some particular point it became a question of power corrupting as well in Zimbabwe?
I actually think that if you look at so Mugabe built a state which became totally founded on a predatory, corrupt system, where the resources of the state, where the state system simply spread patronage. And I want to just point quick examples of the quick turns.
We might not have enough time because we have to go live elsewhere just now, Dr. Chitanga. I'm sorry today. Just very quickly, Amu, concluding words, remarks for you as we mourn the death of Robert Mugabe. But we're busy now, as we're looking at his legacy. Very briefly, what do people must take out of Robert Mugabe's history?
I think what people should take out is the fact that Africans are capable of great and also terrible things. So depending on your choices, whether you're responsible or not, you're either going to do the great things or you're going to do the terrible things.
Thank you very much, Amu. There, that's Amu Ndebele from Zimbabwe's Alliance for the People's Agenda, and the analyst, Dr. Gideon Chitanga.